Good day, everyone, especially to our aspiring teachers. In this lesson, we're going to start with the movements that help shape modern educational thoughts and ideals. In this lesson, you are expected to describe the different movements that help shape modern educational thoughts and, of course, highlight significant contributions of educators to the present educational system. Remember that these ideals are just offshoots of movements in the past, so we are dealing with Humanism, Reformation, Realism, Disciplinism, Rationalism, Naturalism, and the sociological tendency in education. Let us first begin with humanism. The term humanism was derived from Studia Humanitatis, which means studies of humanity. It started in early part of the 14th century during the Renaissance, where there was a revived interest in the importance of a person. The Renaissance was a reaction to otherworldliness that prevailed during the medieval times. So this period was marked by a revival of the classical influence of the Romans and Greeks, as expressed in the flowering of the arts and literature, as well as the beginnings of modern science. Please take note that Renaissance humanists aimed for the development of the intellectual, spiritual, and physical capacities of a person through education. The concept of humanism is almost the same during the medieval times, only that they included in their curriculum the history, physical games, exercises, as well as Greek literature. For the humanistic tradition in Italy, take note that it prevailed around 1333. So it is called individualistic humanism, which stresses the freedom of an individual as a basic means in the achievement of a rich and fulfilled life. So education was to be happy, exciting, and fun experience in the classroom. If the individual is free, therefore, he is likely to achieve a rich and fulfilled life in the future. And of course, as a teacher, we have to make our classroom, especially our teaching, a happy, exciting, and fun experience to the student. We have here the popular humanist. We have Dante Alighieri, the author of the Divine Comedy, Petrarch, a prolific writer and progressive thinker, and also have Vittorino da Feltre, scholar and educator. The Feltre administered Casa Giocosa, or what we call Happy House. It is a court school founded by the Prince of Mantua. So during that time, Casa Giocosa offered a different way of teaching. Like for example, in math, they teach it through games and similar activities to make it more interesting. Aside from that, they also have lessons in swimming, fencing, boxing, dancing, and horseback riding for physical development. If you have the talent and modest disposition, you are qualified to enter Casa Giocosa. It doesn't matter how rich or poor you are as a student. This Casa Giocosa was opened for the children of the poor, and this school was the first to extend education to a wider public. Moving on to the humanistic tradition in Northern Europe. So during this time, there was an organization of pious and socially minded men. They are known as brethren of the common life, or Hieronymians. They facilitated the spread of the humanistic spirit in Northern Europe, and of course, the aim of this group is to combat ignorance, especially of the lower class, by instruction in the scripture. So to start, they set up hostels for students and then eventually established schools. The proponents of this humanism or social humanism believe that educational system must be passable on all levels of education, including elementary, secondary, and tertiary. So in other words, education for all. One proponent is Desiderius Erasmus. He was known for his educational works, liberal education of children, and on the order of study. Erasmus advocated the importance of studying the character of the child using play and games in the teaching-learning process. Of course, he is opposed to the idea that education should be harsh and brutal. So he suggested that education be in accordance with the needs of society, and of course, women should enjoy the same educational rights enjoyed by men. If you could remember, in the previous educational systems, especially in the medieval times and ancient times, only boys or males were given the opportunity to learn and study in formal institution. So in here, there is an equal opportunity between men and women. Another proponent was Johann Sturm. He was the founder of Gymnasium. It is a school attended by large number of students, mostly from noble family. Of course, tuition fees were collected. Classes were devoted to the teaching of Latin and Greek, but somehow he neglected the teaching of vernacular and of mathematics and science. And one weakness of his proposed purpose of education, according to the critics, was not relevant to the needs of time, and physical training was neglected. Another one, we have Roger Azkam. He wrote the book The Schoolmaster. This book was published in 1571 after his death. So in this book, he condemned brutal corporal punishment and other inhuman practices prevalent in English schools of those days. Roger Azkam was known for his double translation method, wherein a pupil is required to translate a passage into English and then retranslate it into the original. He is the first Englishman to write an educational treatise in the vernacular. We also have Caesarism. It was considered humanistic education at its worst. The Ciceronians argued that the aim of education was to impart in the student a perfect Latin style. So one who is studying must strictly follow the rules of Latin grammar. The Ciceronians maintained that all schoolwork should be confined to the study of the writings of Cicero or of his followers, and that conversations and writing should be in Ciceronian phrase, a style of speaking and writing that is characteristically Cicero's. During that time, many educators critiqued the Ciceronianism, and it was the subject of many debates and argument. One of them was Erasmus, who even wrote the Ciceronians to criticize the Ciceronianism. Moving on to Reformation. So during this time, the Catholic Church held so much power that led to its leaders' corruption, within the church. So their influence and control of the Pope gave them the avenue to commit many crimes such as adultery, incest, sodomy, simony, rape, drunkenness, and even murder. So during the time, those who were abused had no chance to speak up, because if they're going to criticize the abusive and corrupt church leaders, they will be condemned and punished by excommunication. Those who would expose the abuse of the priests and other church leaders would be charged of betraying the church, and the worst scenario will be they will be sentenced to death. During the medieval period, especially during the reign of Boniface VIII, the Catholic Church institutionalized the sale of indulgences. An indulgence is defined by Reverend Charles Hart in the Students' Catholic Doctrine as the remission of a sin through temporal punishment or penance. A Catholic is required by ecclesiastical law to confess the sins he or she has committed, and the priest would prescribe the penance. So after performing the penance, the person would then be allowed to take communion. So at the height of the corruption in the church, some priests stopped prescribing the penance. Instead, they required their parishioners to pay an amount of money corresponding to the gravity of their sins. And in that way, they are paying for the indulgence of their sins. They presumed that through these indulgences, a person can escape the tormenting fires of hell as punishment for his or her sins. If one cannot do the penance or buy the indulgence meant for that person, couldn't be given a communion. Failure to take communion meant excommunication or ouster from the church. That is why, to avoid those punishments, most of the people during that time have chosen to be silent on the abuse of the Catholic Church. And there came a faithful German priest and biblical scholar, Martin Luther. He opposed the payment of indulgences, among other abuses of the church leaders. He emphasized that people need no longer pay for the remission of their sins, because Jesus Christ had already done this by way of his death on the cross. For Martin Luther, it is only by faith in God that a person can be justified and be saved from eternal damnation. So on October 31, 1517, Luther nailed to the doorpost of All Saints Church in Wittenberg a copy of his work, the 95 Theses, wherein he attacked ecclesiastical abuses and lists all that he found wrong with the Church of Rome. He also had invited anyone who wished to debate with him on the arguments he had tendered, but no one responded to the invitation. Instead, Pope Leo X ordered Luther's excommunication from the church. So here are the contributions of Luther's Reformation. Luther was for creating educational institutions that would be open to masses. Institutions would be financed by people's councils. For those who did not have the money to send their children to school, the sons at least be allowed to spend 1 or 2 hours in school, while the rest of the time can be spent learning a trade. He also suggested that public schools should be open to all, boys and girls. He believed that states should control and support elementary schools, and the parents should be obliged to send their children to school. Instruction be done in vernacular with the aim of providing the children with knowledge of the scriptures. Those children who showed potentials for teaching and preaching should be given humanistic education in Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. Aside from that, history, natural science, mathematics, music, and gymnastics must be included in the curriculum. So those were the contribution of Martin Luther. Another proponent is Philip Melancton. He is a disciple friend of Luther. Philip Melancton is considered the preceptor of Germany due to his popularity as a professor at Wittenberg. His lectures on Protestant theology drew hundreds of students to the university. In 1528, Melancton was requested by the Elector of Saxony to organize the state school system, later known as the Saxony Plan. Saxony Plan is now known as the foundation of the first public secondary school system in history. It was based on the report or book of visitation regarded by modern educators as first school survey report in history. So it provided for a Latin school in every town and village in Saxony. So in 1559, the Saxony Plan was implemented and provided a comprehensive educational system from vernacular schools teaching reading, writing, counting, church hymns, religion, through Latin schools of 6 classes teaching the classics to the university level. Now, let's move on to the rise of Protestantism. Those who made the protest against the Catholic Church corruption, they are called Protestants. But today, this term is used to refer to the Christian churches separating from Roman Catholic Church during the Reformation. Protestant Church defend beliefs and practices just like the principle of justification by faith, the priesthood of all believers, the authority and sufficiency of the Bible, the right and duty of individual judgment in matters of faith. Protestantism rejects as unscriptural the ceremonial reverence of saints, monasticism, clerical celibacy, and all but 2 sacraments. So it is likewise marked by non-liturgical worship featuring preaching and emphasis on individual salvation or morality. So let's highlight here the emphasis on individual salvation or morality. So the influence of Protestantism is vast around countries in Northern Europe. So just like in Switzerland, we have John Calvin. He is a Frenchman, educated in law and humanities. He had to flee France because of his conversion to Protestantism. So in his own way, he established the form of Protestantism called Calvinism. The theological doctrines of Calvinism are the following. First, it emphasized the sovereignty of God in the bestowal of grace. It includes election of predestination, limited atonement, total depravity, irresistibility of grace, perseverance of saints. So to be elect is to be chosen by God as an object of mercy or favor. So in Calvinism, a human being is predestined either by election to an eternal state of bliss in God's presence or by reprobation to a state of misery in alienation to God. Next, we have the English Reformation. In 1534, King Henry VIII wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who had not been able to give him a an heir to the throne. Catherine was Catholic and annulment was not allowed by the Catholic Church. So, what King Henry did was to persuade the English Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy, which severed all relations of the English sovereign with the papacy and established the Anglican Church. So that marked the beginning of the separation of the Anglican Church, known as the Protestant Church of England, from the Church of Rome. So Henry VIII included the schools in his policy on the separation of powers. That include the confiscation of land owned by monasteries and on which schools were built and sold, this to his political supporters. So during the time, many primary schools and grammar schools had to close their operation. So during the time of Elizabeth I, in 1558, a considerable portion of the national budget for education was set. And that continued around 16th and 17th century. Moving on to Counter-Reformation, from the word itself, there was a reformation in the church during this time. The Luther's criticisms of the church had greatly affected that reformation. And also during the time, Pope Paul III convened the Council of Trent for the purpose of instituting reforms in the Roman Catholic Church. Alongside, Protestants utilized education to attract people and indoctrinate them later. So the Catholic Church started to use education to her advantage. So we have now the orders in the Roman Catholic clergy. So in order to carry out these ends, the Church authorized the establishment of several priestly orders that would serve as educational and social arm of the Church. So we have the Johnsonist and the Christian Brothers. So let's talk about the Jesuits. They are the Society of Jesus, established by Ignatius of Loyola, a Spanish noble and soldier in 1540. The purpose of this society was expressed in its motto, Ad Majorem Dei Gloriam, which means everything for the greater glory of God. The Jesuits did not concentrate on elementary education, so they put greater emphasis on tertiary education. Tertiary education is for the training of leaders of the church and state. They employed excellently trained teachers. Method of teaching was aimed at doing a small amount of work at a time, but making sure was well done, as it is said, slowly but surely. So mastered and retained. So they utilized oral instruction, memorization by means of constant repetition, as well as review. So they also abolished corporal punishment. Instead, they utilized rivalry and competition, such as debates, to motivate students to study harder. The winners in those competitions, of course, they were given rewards and other privileges. And to note, the Jesuits wrote most of their own textbooks. We also have the Johnsonists of Port Royal, aside from the Jesuits. They are founded by Jean Duvigier de Horam, or more popularly known as Abbe de Saint Cyran. So around 1635, Saint Cyran, with the help of some influential friends, gained control of the convent at Port Royal, where the Johnsonists started to take over with male pupils in 1635. So by 1646, the group had transformed the convent into little schools of Port Royal. Johnsonists emphasize French language, logic, and foreign languages. So the aim of their education is to develop moral and religious character of the child in line with the philosophy of René Descartes that human nature is essentially bad. So their education was basically religious. Aside from that, they also emphasized the importance of manual labor and works of charity. They believe not only in memorization but also in comprehension, that one should have to understand very well a certain lesson. So the usual classroom setup would be one teacher for maximum of 6 students. So male students were assigned to male teachers and also girls to the female teachers. So education during the time was both for boys and girls. Moving forward to the Christian Brothers, it was established by Jean-Baptiste de La Salle in 1684. The goal of the school is to educate the poor and underprivileged children in northern France. The teachers, who are known as the Christian Brothers, were bound by the usual monastic vows. So they taught reading, writing, elementary arithmetic, and religion. So they advocated the use of vernacular as medium of instruction in order to attract the poor students to his school. So the school enforced complete silence among the students as the teachers used signals to communicate instead of commands and inflicted corporal punishment as a form of discipline. The Christian Brothers organized training courses for teachers. No one was allowed to teach a course without first mastering it. So aside from that, they also emphasized individualized instruction. Teachers serve as facilitator, and they classified their pupils according to their ability and also provided them copies of common book. So during the time, the students in a group were simultaneously taught by one teacher. Now let's move on to realism. It is an education which natural phenomena and social institutions, rather than languages and literatures, are the chief subjects of study. So in here we have humanistic realism, sense realism, and social realism. Humanistic realism aimed to secure a knowledge of human society and its institutions, of nature and man's reaction to nature through a study of content and not the form of classics. The most popular proponents of humanistic realism were Milton and Rabelais. Milton was a poet. He published tractates on education. He defined education as that which fits a man to perform justly and skillfully and magnanimously all his offices, both in private and public, in time of peace or war. Milton believes that education must prepare one for life in the real world. So for him, boys should study formal grammar and the content of classical literature. He also suggested that the entire education of a boy from age 12 to 21 be given in the academy instead of it being divided into the secondary school and university. On the other hand, Franco Arrivola was a university scholar and a satirist from France who considerably attacked the insincere, shallow, and formal life and education provided by church and schools. He advocated that all forms of studies must be made pleasant, with games and sports being utilized toward the physical development of a child and for practical application later in life. So education should be attractive rather than compulsive. Arrivola was known for his idea that education is gained through books, though emphasis should be on mastery of their content and actual use in one's life. Next, we have the social realism. It emphasized study of modern foreign languages. It also stressed the importance of traveling to allow one to interact with people from all walks of life. One proponent is Michel de Montaigne or Michael de Montaigne. He was a lawyer and public official, authored Pedantry and the Education of Children. He articulated that education should prepare the individual for the practical affairs of real life. Learning through a book is not enough. For him, ideas are acquired through interactions with other people. So from there, a person accumulates real knowledge and wisdom, not merely information, discipline, judgment, mental power, and other capacities which are useful in actual life. Montaigne also believed that learning should be carried out with proper provision for the care and training of body and under pleasant conditions, not in terror or under compulsion. It's most likely the same with the idea that children learn best if they are motivated in the classroom and not threatened. Finally, for him, the aim of education is not to produce scholars and professionals, but to prepare a young boy to live the life of a gentleman in the world of affairs. Is possible only through the course of his education, which should include the virtue. Next, we have sense realism. Knowledge comes primarily through the senses, and education is founded on the training of sense perception rather than pure memory activity. It condemns the use of excessive and harsh discipline in learning. They emphasize that education should be taught in vernacular. The sense realist introduced a new teaching method called inductive method, from simple to complex. So it's like knowledge is to be gained only after one has experience dealing with the problem. Only after the experience can one formulate a law or generalization. So one proponent of this is John Amos Comenius. He was the first educator to advocate the use of visual aids in classroom teaching. He had published his books, Orbis Sensualium Pictus, or The Visible World in Pictures, the first illustrated textbook for children. So it attempted to dramatize Latin through pictures, illustrating Latin sentences accompanied by one or two translations in the vernacular. So he provided a comprehensive curriculum from elementary to university levels using the tenet know all things, do all things, and say all things. So for him, an individual is divided into 4 stages of 6 years. Like 0 to 6, home should serve as the school. 6 to 12, vernacular elementary school. 12 to 18, Latin school. And 18 to 24 years, university. They also included the processing of persons' experiences, so that aside from the 3 R's, history, geography, drawing, and mechanical arts, would be developed. Comenius also introduced educational principles which now guide our educational systems. First, older children should stay longer in school, while younger ones should stay in school only for a short period. That is why, for example, for kindergarten, they only have 2 hours a day or 4 hours. And then for senior high school, they have they spend 8 hours a day in school. Next, all classes of the same level should have the same textbook, teachers, and tests. So morning hours should be developed or devoted for intellectual subjects, while afternoon should be spent on subjects that promote physical and aesthetic development. All subjects should be thoroughly mastered. Education should be in accordance with the child's natural interest, and the level of teaching should be appropriate to the child's understanding. And lastly, effective learning is done through the use of vernacular. That is why from K to grade 3, mother tongue in the Department of Education, public schools is used as part of the Enhanced Education Basic Education Act, or RA 10533. Another sense realist was Francis Bacon. He has his book, The New Atlantis, wherein he described his ideal society as comparable to the utopia described by a fellow Englishman, Sir Thomas More. For him, knowledge of nature is the only real and fruitful knowledge and should the only basis of all scientific progress. He was known for his Baconian method of research. He was also known for his effort to make scientific inquiry practical rather than metaphysical. Next, we have Richard Mulcaster, the school head of Merchant Taylor School and St. Paul's Schools. He authored Elementaries and Positions, wherein he maintained that education should be in accordance with nature. So the aim of education is to secure the expression and development of childish tendencies and not suppress them. All teaching processes should be adapted to the pupils, and that mother tongue or the vernacular should be used as method of instruction. So he maintained the teachers should be required to obtain university training just like lawyers, physicians, and ministers. So he worked hard for the establishment of maintenance of training colleges for teachers, now known as normal colleges. Now we have also Wolfgang Rat, was a German sense realist. He advocated the use of vernacular as medium of instruction, so the child no longer learns the language and can concentrate wholly on the lesson being studied. So he believed in mastering a piece of work first before proceeding to the next. He also favored repetition and memory to ensure mastery. Moving on, we have disciplinism, or known as formal discipline. It was based on Aristotle's faculty psychology, which asserted that mind is made up of certain faculties: memory, reason, will, and judgment. So it maintains the reason that the power of person develops in one faculty, and it can be used equally with other subjects to meet other experiences in life. So to realize this, emphasis on math and linguistics must be considered. John Locke is one proponent of this disciplinism. He is an English educator philosopher. For him, education was a discipline, and it must be broader than that of the schoolmaster. For him, the aim of intellectual endeavor was truth, but the attainment of truth in every human activity should be guided by reason, and the mind is only capable of obtaining and formulating reason if it is educated to this end. So therefore, education should follow rigid discipline for the mind to attain its goal. So he published Thoughts Concerning Education in 1693, stressing that at birth, a child's mind can be compared to a tabula rasa or blank tablet. So from blank tablet, as years go by, it will have its imprints and writings coming from the experiences of the child, which he has acquired in life. So therefore, it is ideal to provide desirable and pleasant experiences for the child during the growing up years. So rather than acquisition of knowledge, Locke believed in the moral development and the formation of desirable habits. So he advocated that education should be composed of three separate but equally important components: the physical, moral, and intellectual education. Of course, when we talk about physical education, it includes physical training in order for a child to possess a sound mind in a sound body. For moral education, it's the development of virtue, which includes self-discipline, control of desires, so things like that. For intellectual education, of course, the purpose is to train the mind in certain habits, among which are memory, reasoning, judgment. So this will be gained through exercise and discipline. Now let's proceed to rationalism. Aristotle said that man is a rational animal, and to be rational, he paved the way towards thinking, the ability of a human person to think based on reasoning and logic. So this rationalism was an educational philosophy during the latter part of 17th century. It took its roots during the period Age of Reason or Age of Enlightenment. So this philosophy claimed that human reason was the sole source of knowledge and sole determiner of whether a thing or action is acceptable or not. If there are things that do not conform to human reasoning, then that must be rejected. So the rationalist upheld the right of a person to express his or her own ideas and opinions with freedom. It led to the creation of the enlightened class among the aristocrats. They are known as Illuminati. So this class is represented by Voltaire, who held that education must be free from religiosity. For them, religion is just an illusion to the believer and a deception by the priesthood, a view that was bitterly opposed by the adherents of naturalism. What is naturalism? It is an educational philosophy which advocated that education should be in accordance with the nature of the child. So this means that all educational practices are focused toward the natural development of the innate talents and abilities of the child. We have here the proponent, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, from his book, Social Contract. He described an ideal society which is in accordance with the natural state. He also wrote Emile, an educational novel that is referred to as a charter on childhood. He described education as being based on a knowledge of a true nature of man instead of on the meaningless traditions of the school and on the entire ignorance of childhood. His fundamental principle is that everything is good as it comes from the hand of the author of nature, but everything that degenerates in the hands of man. Rousseau also believed that cities are the graves of the human species, which means that men are naturally good, but because of the influences of a corrupt and wicked society, it makes them evil. So for Rousseau, he advocated that the child should start with what he called negative education, training the child to guard the heart against vice and the mind against terror. A child should not be taught the ideas of right and wrong, for he cannot understand them yet. The mother should nurse the child. So when the right time comes, the father should train the child. So this is to develop the child's natural talents and abilities and make his body healthy and strong, because Rousseau believed that the weaker the body, the more it commands, the stronger it is, the better it obeys. He who can do everything does nothing bad. Hence, everything should be done without compulsion or force. So, for example, a child should learn to walk without anyone teaching him. So, effort should be made to restrict the child's vocabulary because it is disadvantageous for him to have more words than ideas and to know how to say more things than what he can think. Now, let's move on to childhood stage. So, Rousseau described childhood as the most critical period of human life. So at this stage, moral training should be based on natural consequences, where nothing should be done to force the child's mind to do or think contrary to his desire. The child need not to be taught or to read nor write, but instead he must be allowed to learn through his own initiative. So his physical training should be through jumping, running, climbing, and swimming. So Rousseau believed that even though a child is left alone to learn, he would still be capable of learning to measure distances, compare the weights of things, draw objects, and make his own inferences due to his constant contact with objects and natural phenomena. So during the stage of reason, from age 12 to 15, the child has more strength than what he needs. So this is the best period for the child to acquire knowledge. At this stage, the sole guide should be curiosity or interest, and the test of a skill is its practical use. So Rousseau suggested that the child be allowed to read the story of Robinson Crusoe, which he considered the study of life according to nature. So at this end of stage of reason, Rousseau expected the child to be industrious, temperate, patient, and full of courage. So after the stage of reason, we have social stage. At this period, the child's body, senses, and brain are already fully developed. The child has been educated solely for himself and by himself. So at this stage, he starts to be educated on social relationships with the chief motive of love for others. So in here, for Rousseau, education should end and begin at this stage. So the individual must now learn to adjust and adapt himself to the conduct and interest of others. The individual's sexual desires and interests start to surface. He becomes attracted to a person of the opposite sex. So education should be brought about by one's experiences. So in this period also, the individual must learn religion, but it should be a matter of the heart, not of the head. Rousseau advocated religion in its natural and purest sense. It's loving God above all others and loving one's neighbor as one loves oneself. Moving on to psychological tendency in education. So the psychological movement in education was the byproduct of studies conducted concerning the nature of the child. It called for the application of psychological principles such as individual differences, motivation, and transfer of learning in education. So this is now known as the child-centered school, pioneering the idea that education is a matter of both human nurture and of natural development. So we have here Johann Heinrich Pestalozzi. He defined education as a natural, symmetrical, and harmonious development of the faculties of the child. He believed in education as a power for the regeneration of society. Sense perception is the real foundation of knowledge, and observation, the basis of all instruction. So he also emphasized object lesson and oral instruction. He maintained that learning through observation of objective materials within a person's experience would give him clear ideas and training in oral expression. So he believed that learning through books would only fill the child's minds with words beyond his comprehension. So teachers must respect the individuality of every pupil and must base discipline upon love. He also emphasized manual labor and industrial education. We also have here Johann Friedrich Herbart. He published Science of Education in 1809 and the Outlines of Educational Doctrine in 1835. For him, education is aimed toward the development of morality or virtue. Intellect and morality are two connected entities. He also stressed that mind develops both through its own experiences and through social interaction. Therefore, the task of a teacher is to present knowledge as coming from experience, from contact with nature, and intercourse from contact with society. He is known for his Herbarian Method of teaching, which consists of 5 formal steps: the preparation, presentation, association, generalization, and application. For preparation, setting the child's mind for the new learning task. Presentation, discussion of the new lesson. Association, it's the recollection of past experiences and relating this to the present learning situation. Generalization, drawing of conclusion based on past and present experiences. And also application, putting into practice of theories the child has learned. So, for example, in preparation, a teacher recall the previous activity or the learner's experience and relate it to the present lesson. So that is how preparation is. For the presentation, it can be through different teaching methods like storytelling, demonstration lesson, reading assignment. That includes the facts or ideas, introducing what is in or introducing the content. For association, this is where a teacher established connection between the old or previous and the new concepts being presented and compared. For generalization, a learner can formulate a general statement based on what he has learned from the content or from the presentation of content. And then application, it is how the idea can be applied in real life experiences. Now we have here FriedrichWilhelm August Probel. He published Education of Man, which contained his ideas and beliefs on education. He opened a school for little children in Blankenberg in 1837, and in 1840 this school was named kindergarten, which means a garden of children. So the kindergarten offered games, plays, songs, and work education. So the primary aim is individual development, educational, moral, social development. He also emphasized actual manipulation of objects, more freedom of activity in the classroom, and group activities to allow students to express themselves. He is considered the father of kindergarten system. Now let's proceed to sociological tendency in education. Education is the chief means of obtaining societal progress and development. And in order to achieve such goal, the public school system came to exist. So it was conceived to provide free and universal education for all members of society. Because sociologists look at education as a process geared toward the propagation, perpetuation, and amelioration of society, and approach the subject through a study of social structure, social activities, and social needs. So sociologists conceive education as a preparation of individual successful participation in economic, political, and social activities of other people. So we have different personalities who influence in this sociological tendency in education. Let us discuss John Dewey. John Dewey founded the School of Pragmatism. He believed that experience is the interaction between biological organism and its environment. Experience is based on action and not knowledge. He authored Reconstruction in Philosophy, Experience in Nature, and Art as Experience. For Dewey, a school is a miniature society. It cannot be a preparation for life, because for John Dewey, education is life, not a preparation for life. Education is growth, and we learn by doing. For him, the aim of education is social efficiency. An individual utilizes his capacities rather than makes them subordinate. He also considered public school system as the chief means of achieving social betterment. The teacher has to introduce into the classroom the simplified activities of a complex society. In that manner, the child will be able to fit into the society he belongs to. John Dewey believes that real education comes after we leave school, and there is no reason why it should stop before our death. Because education is growth. So let us end this activity by having activity 1, creative presentation. So with your group, discuss the influences of the following on our present educational system and create an output that will summarize your discussion. You have to present it creatively, so you can choose from any of the different presentations enumerated in the next slides. You can have the following presentations presented through dance, poetry, choral reading, drama, and other ways of presentation. Please be guided by group. You have to present Humanism, Group 2, Realism, Disciplinism, Rationalism, Naturalism for Group 5. Please be guided by this rubric. And for your activity 2, it is an individual activity, reality check. Are you in favor of the proposed inclusion of CAT or Citizens Army training for senior high school Filipino students? Why or why not? So you write that in your personalized journal, and please be guided with this rubric. You can also post that in our Google Classroom depending on your instructor.